So having just watched the Inequality town hall put on by Bernie Sanders, like I said, with Elizabeth Warren, Michael Moore, and Derek Hamilton, I noticed a couple of things that I think are important. One, they gave a lot of stats. I love the stats, and I think they're jarring. I think they're important to share. A couple times they mentioned the 3 richest men in the country have more money than 50% of the country, more than half the country, just 3 guys. And Michael Moore pointed this out throughout the night, which I think was helpful, that it's not just the Republicans who are doing the corruption, and they are, but it's a lot of Democratic Party as well. And by the way, those 3 guys, well, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, more likely to be Democrats. Bezos, a little bit more likely to be Republican, but they're not what is perceived as wild, crazy right-wingers of the Trump ilk. But it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, if you allow for private financing of elections, you will have the people who finance elections served, period. So I love that Elizabeth Warren, near the end, said, let's call it what it is, corruption. That's what it is, okay? And so that is how the system got rigged. So top 10% of earners have 75% of the wealth in the country. The bottom 50% only have 1% of the wealth. Isn't that amazing? 1% of the wealth for 50%, top 10 have 75.
A lot of people.
Yes, and so then Elizabeth Warren mentioned this chart without showing it, so I wanted to show it. Let's go to graphic 102 here. She talked about how American productivity has been fantastic, and if you watch the Young Turks, you've seen me put this chart up a lot. And I think I said this years and years ago. I think this is the most instructive chart there is, and now it's great to see people in power beginning to refer to it. Productivity has been fantastic for the American worker throughout, including now, but hourly compensation started flatlining. Wages flatline since that chart has it at 73 as the divergence begins, but a good reason to believe that 78 and 80 were the big difference. And Elizabeth Warren mentioned that as well. And so a couple of interesting things related to that. Number one, that is 76 to 78 were 2 infamous Supreme Court decisions before Citizens United, and that was Buckley v. Vallejo and Belani, where the Supreme Court said corporations can give money to politicians, and we were toast, okay? I'm gonna show you the effect it had on taxes in a second, but Elizabeth Warren mentioned something really interesting I did not know about the effect it had on the wage gap and the wealth gap between African Americans and white Americans. So it turns out between 1965 and 1980, we actually started closing the gap. And it shrunk by 30%. So African Americans were starting to catch up to white Americans, which is great news. White Americans were not suffering, they were also going up. All the votes were being lifted, right? And then Supreme Court makes those decisions, and since then, the gap has continued to expand. So, and in fact, Derek Hamilton pointed out that African American families have about 10% of the wealth of white families. It's another set of numbers that I always show you guys. Graphics 104 and 105 here. Average median 2-parent black family net wealth $16,000, and median 2-parent white family in America $161,300.
I'm shocked by that second number as well.
Yeah,
I would have figured it was lower.
So Elizabeth Warren mentioned in Boston it's even way worse. Something to the tune of $247,000 for the average white family, which is great. I'm surprised, that's a nice number, right? Great, wonderful. Average black family, she said, in Boston, $8 in wealth. So what they emphasized throughout the night is equality of opportunity. That's also great to hear, because it's also something that we've been talking about on the Young Turks forever. When people ask me to define a progressive, I say 2 things. One is the expansion of liberty, so to not just property to white men, but to all white men and African Americans, and to women and the gay rights, etc. But the second part is equality of opportunity. And so that is what the right wing mischaracterizes. Nobody's looking for a handout, nobody's looking for equality of results. But things like single payer healthcare gives you a chance, because you're not gonna die, you're not gonna get bankrupted by your healthcare bills. College for all gives your kids a chance. So that's what we're looking for, and that's what we had in things like the GI Bill in the past, and the laws that we passed. And one more thing, they all emphasize, and rightfully so, that this is not how it has to be, that we made choices. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court allowing money in politics allowed the upper class to direct those choices, okay, and to capture those choices. But as a country together, we can get back to making those choices and say it doesn't have to be this way. They have free college in Germany, as they talked about in the town hall, but they have free healthcare, universal healthcare in every developed country but ours. And the list goes on and on. We need to make a choice to end them. And I love that in a town hall about inequality, they said the #1 culprit is money in politics. That is absolutely right. That's why we've been laser focused on it on the Young Turks. That's what you need. You need an amendment to get it out so that we can fix issues like this and go back to making choices in a democracy.
Yeah, wow. Raised a lot of points there. Okay, I'm gonna try to remember the things I was thinking. So I agree, amazing statistics. The one that Michael Moore wanted to focus on the end was we have this idea of what a homeless person is, why they're in that state. And they pointed out that just about half of the homeless people you come across are working. They might be working a full-time job even, but unable to actually afford their rent. So I thought that was a great statistic amongst a lot of great ones. Michael Moore also cited something like 60% of the country, if someone across the country and their family died, they couldn't actually go and visit them, which is another way of saying one of the points that we repeat quite often is that a $400 or $500 emergency could effectively wipe a family out, a significant portion of them. And what he's talking there is about $1,000. So a relatively, what should be a normal thing. You think that with all of the work that we've put in as a society and as individuals over the past 100 years plus, our technology, how our society has advanced, we should be able to go somewhere relatively close by if a person who's close to us dies. That seems like a thing that we should expect to be able to do. We don't vocalize it that way, but for 60% of America, we can't actually live that dream. So you have those statistics, and I also love that they, throughout, when they would introduce each new section, they had video testimonials from around the country. Effectively, I saw right near us in California, I saw down in the South, and all over the place of individuals and their experiences and how it had to do with different sections of the town hall. And I really think that you need both of those things. You need to be able to talk about the broad trends and how they change over time, and statistics can be very powerful in showing that, but you also need to focus on individual people and their lives so that people understand that these are not simply numbers, that these are experiences that people are living right now. When we close off this town hall, they will still be living that. When the primaries end, they will still be living that, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And so I'm glad that they balanced both of those things.
Yeah, John, great point. You almost never see poor people on TV. And almost the only time you see it is in reality shows where they're basically being made fun of. And so it was a little jarring to see people who weren't perfectly groomed, because everybody on TV is polished and groomed. So it's almost like the Hunger Games, and they've got the elaborate outfits, and you never see what's happening in the districts. So in this case, even in the small little videos they showed between the segments, you got to see real Americans, and some of it is great and some of it is tough to watch. And I don't mean that in terms of their personality or character, obviously, but in terms of what they have to live through and suffer through. The stat John was talking about, 60% of Americans, Michael Moore mentioned this in the beginning, can't afford a funeral for a loved one. What are you gonna do? Your family member died, your mom, your dad, your kid, and you can't afford a funeral. What are you gonna do? And you're gonna get knocked out by a small financial emergency, let alone the funerals. Then you got another stat that was mentioned by, again, Derek Hamilton, was 44% of homeless have a job. They're actually employed, but they still can't afford a home. So I wanna show you one of the ways that they rigged the system, because again, enforcing that it's a choice. Let's go to graphic 103 here. This is the taxes. In 1952, when we had amazing productivity and amazing wages in America, corporations paid 32% of all taxes. By 2015, that was down to 10.8, and now that the Trump administration has massively cut their taxes again, it's going to be way lower than that. And what did they do? They shifted taxes onto the middle class. In the payroll tax, that's social insurance and retirement. You see that it was 9.7%, less than 10% in 1952. In 2015, it was 33.5% of all taxes paid, and soon it'll be much greater than that. That is how they rigged the rules. There are many other things, and finally, one other thing that they talked about, they had Cindy Estrada on from UAW. They talked about unions and striking, and celebrated the West Virginia strikes, as they should. Tomorrow on the program, I'll talk about the Kentucky possible strike for teachers there as well, and now Arizona, Oklahoma, all considering teacher strikes. And the reason that they began the strikes in the first place today and back in the day when they originally created unions was for collective bargaining. What does that mean? It means if one of you guys is going up against your boss, you're screwed. But if all the workers unite and they do bargaining at a collective level, then you've gathered up your leverage and you have an even playing field.
Yeah.
Without that even playing field, you don't have equality of opportunity, you don't have leverage, and you have no chance. So look, sometimes unions frustrate me from some of the positions that they take, and I think they put a lot of money in politics as well. But unions as a concept where the workers get together and have some leverage to even the playing field is exactly right. Otherwise, the worker has no chance at all. So those are the ways that you unrig the system so we can go back to actually enjoying the fruits of our labor. It's that first chart where you are just as productive as you have ever been, but your wages do not show it. Let me give you two more stats about the differences. The two differences between those lines, let's put up graphic 102 one more time. There's two stark, amazing facts about this. The difference between the two lines in that span of time is about $12 trillion. That's $12 trillion of wealth that has been taken away from the American worker and redistributed to the top. So, they talk about class warfare whenever the middle class fights back. But when the upper class rigs the rules on their behalf and takes $12 trillion from you, they don't call it class warfare, but it was. And one more amazing stat about that. If our productivity had kept up with if our wages had kept up with our productivity, on average, the average American would be making $17,000 more per year. You just watched a video by the Young Turks, the home of the revolution. If you'd like to get the full show, come join us and become a member. TYTnetwork.com/join.